Hey everyone, welcome to Mindful Dads. We're in a tricky time, and this video I'm about to do is mainly around school closures and how we can, I suppose, look after our kids at home. And I don't mean this in a patronising way, I mean this as in just being aware of particularly what digital media can do in a situation where we're all isolated, we're all socially distant. And if we become too reliant on digital media, then we're heading for an addicted society. So what I mean by this is beginning to understand how our brain works in relation to when we're on social media and on our digital devices. Now these things are absolutely wonderful things. I call them little wisdom boxes because you've got all the knowledge known to man throughout history in a little device, which is absolutely fascinating. But most people use it for media, social media, all that type of stuff. So sometimes it can get used in not the best of ways, and I'm not saying not to be connected to everyone, but sometimes if we're constantly on these things, then we become disconnected with people who are around us, we become disconnected with nature. So let's start with how this impacts on the brain. There's been several studies done on how social media, particularly Twitter, Facebook, all the main platforms, affects our brain and our ability to connect with others around us compared to being on these devices. So if you saw one of my other videos, particularly that we have 3 modes in our brain, and today we're just going to focus on that drive mode. And that drive mode is basically where our dopamine comes from. So it's a goal-focused, instant hit mode, which keeps us focused on the here and now. But in a situation where we're on social media all the time, we're on digital devices, whether that be iPads, phones, Xboxes, PlayStations, then what actually happens is we get a massive dopamine spike in our brains. And it's the instant feel-good chemical, so it makes us feel good. What usually happens is that it's a quick spike, and when dopamine hits us in our brain, then it comes down quite quickly. So it hits a high, we feel really good for a little while, and then it comes down. And that's why we need a little bit more of it. Several studies, there's one interesting study done on the instant spike on when people are on social media. So they've done a study where they mapped people's brains and they mapped the levels of dopamine spikes when people are on Facebook, Instagram, all that type of stuff. So when people are looking at these things and looking for getting the next like or look at the what's happening in the news, then we're getting this, it's feeding that zone in our brains, and we're getting this instant spike. So in the study, what they realise is that when people are on these things for long periods, then there's instant spikes of dopamine. And when I say instant spikes, I mean a spike of dopamine right up to 600%. So we're getting these spikes that are happening constantly. Now, the other things that tend to give us an instant spike in dopamine to them levels is usually drugs and cocaine. Cocaine gives us a big instant spike of dopamine. And the message I'm trying to put across today is that we don't want to be in a situation where we're all socially distant and we take to these devices to make us feel good in the moment, because if they will distract us from what's going on in the world as a means to get away from what's going on. But what's actually happening in the brain, we're becoming addicted. So it's basically digital cocaine if we're not aware of how we use these devices. Now, as adults, we're a little bit more easy to cope with that situation because our brains are fully developed. Now, children, on the other hand, who would be giving their children cocaine in this situation, or who would be giving their children drugs in this situation? Not many people. And I'd urge people in this situation, knowing that if we know this information, then we can limit these devices in troublesome times, so we're able to kind of connect with one another a little bit more, because what we need is people to come together. And sometimes digital devices and digital media and social media sometimes separates us, and we do not need separation in a time like this. So to all you people who are socially isolating, please, please, please be aware of how you're using these devices in these troublesome times. Go back to basics. Go back to basics of reading a book, doing some exercise at home, doing all sorts of things what we used to do prior to digital devices. And I'm not saying don't use these things, because these are wonderful things. I'm using one right now to record this, so I would be a hypocrite if I'm saying stop all these things. We need to use these things as tools rather than them use us. So, you know, when we're on these devices, ask yourself, am I using this or is it using me? And whatever the answer is to your question, then we're then able to kind of just basically become aware of how we can use these things rather than the other way around. Stay safe, everyone. Stay socially distanced in this troublesome time, and I'll see you soon.
Mindful Dads.